everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing some aviation snips made by Midwest. Now I've been using Midwest snips for many years. I've never had one problem out of any of them. And I gotta tell you, it's simply for the fact that they're so well made, the cutting surfaces stay very sharp on them, they're very comfortable to use, but the best feature is the fact that they take a lot less force to do the same job as a cheaper pair of snips. And what I'm basically talking about with that, if you want to cut through some metal with a typical pair of snips, the thicker the metal gets, you really have to press down on it hard to slice through it, where a Midwest snip, in my opinion, takes about half the force to do the exact same job. So what I'm going to do in this video is show you these cutting through various pieces of metal. You're going to be able to see how easily they cut through it, and at the end of it, my hand is not going to be tired. Now, I did a previous video with a general overview of all kinds of different aviation snips, but today I'm going to focus solely on the Midwest snips. I was going through the toolbox the other day and saw these sitting in here, and I thought it would be real nice to re-highlight them just to bring them to your attention. So what I'm going to do now is show you the different features of the Midwest snips, and then we're going to see them cutting through all those different pieces of metal. The three different types of Midwest aviation snips that I'm going to show you today is a pair of the straight cutters, a pair of the regular offsets, and then finally a pair of the 90-degree offsets. So depending on what you're working on, if you're an HVAC technician and you're cutting in holes in the top of ductwork, these are probably going to be what you use every day. But if you're just like me, a DIYer or a professional in a garage, then you're going to want to use the 90-degree offsets, because no matter what you're working on, it's actually going to take that material and eject it below the level of your hand. You can still get a very good cut on things, and I find these to be the most useful. I don't particularly like the straight cutters, but for some people, they may work. Now, all of these are rated up to 18 gauge metal, so I do have a piece of that to cut through. And you can see it is very stiff and is not very flexible. So the lower the gauge is actually going to be the thicker the material. Next we have 20 gauge metal. You can see there's slightly more flexibility with this, but it's still very thick. Then we have 22 gauge metal, more flexibility because it is thinner. And then finally we have 26 gauge metal. Now this is going to be similar to the ductwork in your house, and you can see it is extremely flimsy. So what we're actually going to do is start out with the 26 gauge metal. I'm going to take a pair of the straight cutters and we're going to cut right through here, and with almost no effort it will cut right through it with no problems at all. Moving on to the 22 gauge metal, we'll slice right through this. Once again, minimal effort. The offsets will slice right through it, and it leaves a very nice clean cut. Moving to the 90 degrees and a piece of the 20 gauge metal. Now this is fairly thick metal. This is about as thick as a 1970s Cadillac would be. So it's not cheap and flimsy like today's cars. This is real thick, heavy duty metal. And we'll take the 90 degrees and we'll actually just cut right through here. You can see it peeling down the side, and it slices it right off. Now all of these are rated up to 18 gauge metal, so just to show you, it will cut through that also. Now this is very thick. This is thicker than any vehicle you're ever going to see on the road. We'll take the offset pair, and just with minimal force, you can see it will cut through there. And with a pair of normal store brand ones, this is pretty much impossible. And just using one hand, it cuts right through it. If you grew up on a farm or you happen to work on farm equipment, then you might already know what this is. It's a piece of Baler Belt. And what that means is it's a large belt that goes inside of one of the machines that actually makes the large round hay bales that you see sitting out in a farmer's field. And what this is extremely heavy duty, and it's extremely thick, and it's made to last a very long time. It's so heavy duty you cannot cut through it with a standard razor blade. But what I'm going to show you is basically how a competitor snip will cut through this, and then how the Midwest snip is going to cut through this. And the biggest difference between the two is the fact that the actual pivot bolt itself. Now on a Midwest snip, the pivot bolt goes through one side, but it's actually threaded in the rear portion, and then it also has a lock nut on there. So there's no way for the blades to actually separate. But on a competitor snip, there's actually the same size hole on the front part as well as the rear, and then they only have a lock nut on the back. So with extra pressure, it's actually going to separate those blades and it won't cut through certain materials. So here's a good example. The Baler Belt, when we take the competitor snip and try to cut through it, what's going to happen, it's going to bind and you can see it sandwiches between the two blades. It's not cutting, and you see this big air gap in between them. The blades are actually separated, and when we release the pressure, they go back straight. So you can see with no pressure in there, they are together. But when we insert the Baler belt, it's actually going to push those apart, simply because this is so hard to cut through. Now I'm going to try that same cut with the Midwest Aviation Snips. And if you watch these, they will not separate, and they're actually going to cut right through the Baler belt. And that's simply because that center pivot bolt goes through the top part of the blade, and then it is threaded into the rear blade, and then there's also that lock nut on there. So there's physically no way for these blades to actually separate. Now for cutting things like heavy metal screen or even wire lath, you're actually going to want to get a pair of the offset aviation snips. And what this will allow you to do is cut through the material, and instead of it coming straight back into your hand, it's actually going to go right along the bottom and drop off. They have a recessed pivot bolt right here, so there's nothing for the actual material to catch on. And when you cut through it, it's actually going to drop down below. So just watch the material I cut, and you can see it drop down below the level of that pivot bolt, and it's completely away from my hands. So there's no risk of me actually hurting myself as I'm cutting through this. And for the final test, I want to show you how much it can actually shear off the edge of a piece of metal and not slip. So what you see with a pair of normal aviation snips is that it will actually fold that end over if you get near it. But with the Midwest Snips, they have serrations on the blade, and what we'll do is just shear a very thin slice off of the edge of this metal. You can watch it fold down, and it's not even on the side that I'm on. So it's very hard for me to judge this, but just looking at it, I think that I'm getting a very thin cut. And looking at the actual pieces of metal folding over, I can see that is the case. It's not slipping, and really it can get into those places where a normal pair would just fold the material over and damage it. Because of the serrations on the blade, it's actually able to get a much cleaner cut every single time. So now you've seen the Midwest Aviation Snips for yourself. I gotta tell you, even after all that cutting, my hand is not sore at all. And that's simply for the fact that it takes a lot less force to cut through metal with the Midwest Snip versus a store brand snip. Now a couple other things I want to point out. These are made in the USA, and they carry a lifetime warranty through Midwest against manufacturer defects. So if you ever have a problem with them, and it's not a simple matter of you wearing them out, they're going to replace those for you free of charge. If you like this video, please click like. If you like my channel, please click subscribe. And thanks for watching.